said she never had a runaway, and I said, baby, okay.
Hello and welcome to the Eighth Note Sessions. I'm Mike Shamil.
I'm Devin Mullen.
And our guest today is Caroline West. Caroline, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Caroline is a music therapist. And Caroline, for those at home that aren't familiar with music therapy, can you give them kind of the gist of it?
Yes. So music therapy is essentially the practice. It's an evidence-based practice, document-based, that where we use music within a therapeutic relationship with a credentialed professional in order to address non-musical goals. A musical goal would be like learning to play an instrument or something that, a music teacher might teach. And non-musical goal would be something like improving your ability to speak verbally, improving your range of motion, improving your ability to express your emotions, to self-regulate, and et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes it can include learning an instrument, but that would be for other emotional purposes or other behavior or motor purposes. So it's really the use of music to achieve non-musical goals within a therapeutic relationship by a credentialed professional.
That's pretty cool. Now, how does that work? Do you, what part of playing music and working with the students on a musical level, allows you to achieve those non-musical goals?
So it's really, it all goes back to the fact that music just targets every single area, essentially almost every single area of the brain at once. And that gives us as therapists a lot of freeway. Because if you think about it, there's really one area of the brain that is directed for speech and one that is directed for motor skills. And so if someone is having difficulty in those areas and you are only using that area of the brain to work on that skill, it would make it much harder for the client to achieve their success. But if we're able to use all of the different areas at once, including the healthy, untouched areas, then and it's through a medium that the client is passionate about and really feels a connection with. We're able to take that innate connection as well as those other targeted areas and really use it to be able to achieve those results.
That's got to be a really great element to have, to actually be able to tap into, the client's passion, to really make it more than just like, oh man, I have to go and talk about my feelings today. Like actually to have something that, further motivates them.
Yes, it's really incredible. I love my job so much. I feel so lucky to be able to do this.
By the same token, of course, though, it is a bit of a parameter, though, in a clinical setting. It doesn't sound like it's a sort of generalized, one-size-fits-all approach.
Definitely not. Every single case, every single demographic that you work in is completely different. So as a music therapist, you have to be trained to work in all settings and really be able to effectively address patients of all different needs with all different musical tastes too. So you've really got to be quite flexible and versatile.
Speaking of that, I'm sure approaching music through the lens of, as you said, an empirically scientific, clinical psychology, basically, it probably brushes up against the more amorphous and enigmatic facts about music, because very often in music we try to embody and translate things that we can't precisely know or describe into something that we create an association with.
Yes.
Do you find that engaging in music from those two differing approaches, that it is more, they work against you? Is it like a water and oil situation, or is it more synergistic?
I feel like it's pretty synergistic. A lot of times, people really just can feel validated just by hearing something that really sounds like what's going on in their mind. And that itself can be very cathartic for individuals. So I really feel like those two areas work together.
I wonder if it gives you like the cheat codes too. It's like I know the neurology behind this. I can control your brain.
Exactly. Hey, sometimes when people are feeling angry, I'll play a fully diminished chord and really fast. Oh, yeah, really get that anger.
All right, kids. Today we're going to talk about gent and how it's going to make you feel less upset.
Got it.
Starts ruffling your hair.
So a lot of times what I'll do, especially for emotions, is I'll play two very different sounds and with purposeful different musical elements. Like I'll do a minor sound, and if we're, say I'm trying to promote the child to be able to understand the feeling of happiness, I'll play something really slow and minor and say, oh, do you think this sounds happy? And then I'll play another juxtaposing chord progression that's major and fast, upbeat, and say, or do you think this one sounds happy? And it's a different way for them to be able to identify those emotions. And,
which I'm sure broadens communication skills and serves that non-musical goal. And
exactly.
We
got the lingo.
Yeah. Something I'm curious about. Psychology itself is a fairly, as far as hard sciences go, a pretty young field, really.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly a post-Enlightenment
Yes.
area of study. And music therapy, even in that context, is relatively recent in the last several decades, right?
Yes.
So what was sort of the tipping point, you think, where clinicians started looking at sort of, kind of lateral thinking a little bit, taking a non-direct approach to directly address problems? Or, well, not problems, but attend to goals or produce outcomes.
Yeah. So it all really started after World War II. And then it was when the veterans were in the hospital that some doctors would have musicians come in and play music for the patients. But the doctors, being very attuned, no pun intended, to the patient's responses, they noticed how powerfully their patients were responding to the music. And they decided, these musicians really need clinical training. And that was really the genesis of music therapy. And so, they're definitely very recent, especially after World War II is not, relatively speaking, that long ago. But that is really where it all started, with those doctors saying, this is really great, but the people who are administering this cannot just be off the streets. They've got to really...
I could go busking and then get picked up by a hospital the next day.
Some hospitals would like to do that, but that's a whole other thing. So that's a whole other topic to get me talking about.
That is rather remarkable, though, in a time where just contemporaneously, if it's after World War II, where you're not too far away from a time where PTSD really was more of a stigmatized or portrayed and talked about more as like a character weakness rather than a symptom of psychological duress. Yes,
that's a very good point. Yeah.
Do you think that says something broader about music, just as a way of engagement with things, that it could sort of pierce through that cultural veil and be seen as being a method of healing?
I think definitely. And I would imagine that, depending on what music the musicians were playing back then, maybe some of the doctors even had some emotional connection to what was going on. And they were realizing how, just really how powerful it is, because music it definitely transcends words and can really just have a very validating and very intense connection with people. And so I think that absolutely speaks volumes about that.
I mean, I wouldn't want to overdetermine or anything, but I would assume the one significant benefit music therapy has, as you said, is the connection versus other forms, because there's always sort of this, subject and observer relationship that a clinician will have with their patient. But engaging in music, it's much more of a shared common ground to engage with. There isn't necessarily the weight of observation or scrutiny in the same way, right?
Yes. And when we are playing music, when we're making music with clients, we are very much equals. So it's not like, I mean, sometimes I will model what for my kids to do, but when we are engaging together, I'm taking musical cues, not just from the music that they're making, but from maybe their facial expression or their body language. And it's really a give and take between the therapist and the client. They're both providing equal input or as equal of input as possible in the music making process. So it's very equal.
Well, that's marvelous. Stepping outside the sort of couching of music therapy as occupation into the more universal idea of music as therapy. Mm-hmm. How can perhaps people who aren't either clinicians themselves or, I personally believe everybody should be engaged in some kind of therapy, but let's say they're not in the official capacity of it. What sorts of lessons can just regular musicians, folks who maybe aren't musicians at all, sort of take from what music therapy shows?
I feel like most people in this world connect to music in some ways. I have come across a couple people in my life who have literally told me the sentence, "I don't like music." And it always kind of takes me, or both times has taken me off guard. Like, how can you not connect with this in some way? There is, music from your youth when, you're going through all this stuff in your life. And that's often what people connect to the most. So I really feel like most people in this world already have some sort of emotional connection to music, and really some ways that they can use it. And so sometimes a lot of those ways of being able to kind of implement self-music therapy, it's really not music therapy because it has to be within a credentialed relationship with a therapeutic relationship. But really just, I feel like finding those songs that really speak to your heart, sound cliche or corny, finding those songs that really speak to you and being able to listen to them, that can just be so therapeutic for people. And I feel like that is a really good way for non-musicians to be able to engage. And then and also another simple technique that we use in music therapy is called lyric analysis, which is exactly what it sounds like, where you analyze the lyrics of a song, and you can use those lyrics either to maybe investigate what the potential narrator or a singer is going through, or you can draw some
Devin, we gotta hide our lyrics.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Throw them to me, I'll psychoanalyze. No.
Please. I'm worth like 10 caseloads. You don't need me. That's fine.
So, but that can be a very applicable technique for people of all backgrounds, musical backgrounds, non-musical backgrounds, to be able to connect with music in that way and to be able to kind of help heal themselves.
Beautiful. So, like any other field, it's almost passé to ask at this point, but has COVID presented any alterations or changes to your normal routine?
I laugh.
Of course not. Why would you ask that? Business as usual.
Oh, yes. I was doing teletherapy before COVID. So there's been numerous changes in music therapy as a result. especially because so many particles, and when you sing, there's so many particles that are released, and that is exactly what you want to avoid in COVID. And it's really changed for in-person sessions. It's changed the structure of the therapy room, which is actually a big part of what I do in person, because especially I travel from site, and you have to make sure that you're staying as far away as you can as possible from your clients, while still being able to maintain that therapeutic relationship, which is very difficult at times. So that's one way that it's changed it. It really affects the instruments that you can use. So I only am using oral motor instruments with my clients when it is absolutely necessary. So whereas I might have used it to be able to facilitate engagement with some clients that are especially motivated by that, I'm really limiting that right now to only needing to work on your oral motor skills. So then in that case, you have to come up with different methods of sustaining engagement through the music. And so it affects it in that regard. And then it also really affects it on teletherapy, because there's a lot of clients where, previous to teletherapy, they were loving playing the drum sets, they were loving playing the full piano, everything. But in their homes, or whatever environment, sometimes they'll do teletherapy at school and everything, they don't have access to that. And so you really have to be able to adapt what you do in sessions to meet the client's goals and to sustain their engagement and their enthusiasm using these different methods. And so it's called for a lot of creativity.
I wonder, in observing because part of what's in that equation then is a question of access that, people you would be working with in terms of what they have, whether it's things like an internet connection or a quiet home environment or, this, that, or the other. Do you think it's problematic beyond just in how it creates literal distance? It prevents the closeness, and it's through the internet, so it's not as clear, but also that people who already maybe don't have access to things are more acutely not having access to things in this state.
Yes, definitely. So, and especially in one of the biggest impacts I've seen of that is the ability to play music together online. When there's an unsteady internet connection, you're losing so much of that real-time connection that you really need in order to have the most successful interactions. And there's definitely been there's definitely a difference when there is when that's going on. And some kids don't have access to internet. So luckily, none of my clients have been in that situation, but I know other therapists and people in related fields that have had that with some of their clients, and it really makes a difference. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting how there's always the socioeconomic component, isn't there?
Yeah, there definitely is.
Yeah, and this pandemic has really highlighted a lot of that, things that were not as obvious before, the disparities between different groups of people, now it's like impossible to, ignore. It's come really to the foreground. Mm-hmm. Now, for people at home, is there any way that say someone who's watching this, say they have an extra instrument or something, or a guitar that they're not really using, and that they'd maybe like to donate it, is there any sort of contact that they could find that they could reach out to and be like, hey, I've got this, if one of your students need this, how do I get it to them? Is there a resource like that available right now?
That is a great question. I wouldn't say there's one universal resource, but what you can do is you can go on to the American Music Therapy Association website, and you can find therapists by location. So if you type in your city and your state, you should come up with a list of therapists with some contact information, and you can be able to contact therapists that way.
And that helps you keep it local.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say that would probably be the best tool for being able to donate some instruments.
What are some examples of instruments that would be especially useful?
So, well, let's see. Well, I've got some right here.
I mean, like for your students, like, you know, like what are some of like the things that they need at the moment?
So I'd say some of the most useful instruments are a lot of handheld percussion can be really great in terms, and there's different, and we use different instruments for different fine motor grasps and everything. But really just like, tambourines, drums, shakers, rhythm sticks, those can be great for kids. So, and they could be great for adults too, but a lot of times, I work with kids, and so that's my main context. Ukulele can be another great instrument that is very easy to learn. And so that can really create a sense of self-empowerment with the client. Or like, for example, you only need one finger to play a C chord. Then you got a chord right there. And
it's a very kid-sized instrument too. It's not like trying to pick up something very unwieldy for them.
Yes, exactly. So I try and use ukulele as much as possible, especially with the little ones. And so that's another great instrument. Then I'm trying to think here. Guitars are always great. Pianos are, fantastic. There's so much you can do with both of them. So I'd say, really sticking to ukulele, drums, like the percussion instruments, guitar, piano. Those are probably my go-tos.
Nice.
Another therapist might have other ideas too, but those would be my go-to instruments.
So we're just about at time. One last question I wanted to ask. And I'll give the last question to Shamil. How do you find the headspace to separate when our country's in a time of trauma? I would say this is a very traumatic time.
Yes.
And you're engaged with a process of healing with people who are very intensely suffering. I mean, you can pretty it up. You can talk about, things to make it sting less, but it's remarkable. How do you manage that?
So that's a very good question. So let's see, when I'm working with a client, my brain is only right there. So I'm not thinking about a single other thing going on in this world. So just really hyper focused. And I feel like that is part of the training that we get as music therapists, is how to really just be in the moment with your client. And so honestly, I feel like that helps me, because when I'm in their sessions, I'm not thinking about anything else that's going on. I'm really just focused on what they need at that moment. And sometimes, not gonna lie, sometimes even like, our code of ethics really adheres us to maintain that, we're the ones helping them maintain our professionalism. But, sometimes you can't help but feel that human connection. And sometimes, like, if I'm really focused on a kid and they're really just engaged and so happy and really involved in the music making process, I can't help but just notice that makes me feel better too. So, like, as much as I don't do it for that reason, it just is kind of a side effect that happens. So how can you not feel happy when you have kids that are just beaming and loving to play music, and just, it just brings such joy. So I feel like that is how I cope with it. But a music therapist who is working in a different setting would probably have a very different answer. So, for example, a music therapist working in a correctional facility, like they might really have a difficult time being able to do that, and they would probably need to have a lot more purposeful self-care in order to resolve those issues. And so and those methods of self-care would be entirely up to that person. But so I feel like as a music therapist in special education, I can kind of get that joy from some of my clients, even though that's not the purpose of our interactions.
Perks of the job.
Exactly. It's perks of the job. And so I feel like that for me, and being able to really just be in the moment with the client, is how I'm able to deal with that.
Marvelous.
Thank you.
So the question I have for you, pardon me, is taking some of the skills that music therapists have. What kind of advice could you give to musicians who feel like they really want to make their music connect more genuinely with people? What advice could you give for them, given your unique perspective?
That's a great question. I'd say really just, take your time and delve into each song, experience, like if there is a situation or an emotion that lies behind you writing a song, really kind of take the time to do some self-exploration and go through in your mind what was going on, what would help you in that situation, and really reflect that in the lyrics as well as in the chords and the melody and everything. And don't be afraid to just, experiment and see what, throw some crazy chord progressions out there. You never know what could really stick and what can really resonate with you. So I'd say don't be afraid to just really give yourself the permission to be creative.
That's some great advice. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Caroline, that was a very, very interesting perspective you gave us today, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And with that, this is the Eighth Note Sessions. I'm Mike Shamil.
And I'm Devin Mullen.
And our guest today was Caroline West. Thank you again, Caroline.
Thank you.
Here's an excerpt from Someone to Sing To by Mike Zogaria. You can find his music at mikezogaria.com. That's Mike, Zogaria.com.
Another Friday night, you got your hair just right, but still you're back at home. I paid to park the car, and then I walked too far, surrounded and alone. Everybody is holding someone, I wanna hold you.
The Eighth Note Sessions are produced by Music is Art. Help keep programs like this going by donating today at musicasart.org. Thank you for listening.